Hi, folks. You are very, very, very welcome to the first Genos Live episode that we have ever run on a Friday. So, besides welcome, let me say to you, happy Friday, and I hope you're looking forward to a restful and recuperative weekend. And we're talking today to a lady, Allison Graham, who is going to help you make this weekend even more productive. She's a lady who coined the expression coping fatigue. And even before I heard it defined, I thought, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's that sense of fatigue that comes from having to show up in a resilient way for quite so long. And Alison is going to talk about what it looks like. I'm going to talk about how you deal with it. So stick with us over the next 60 minutes and we'll give you something that you can start to implement over the weekend that could well change your life. Now, before we go, or we bring Allison in and we talk about her book and we talk about the various programs she does and so on and so forth, I'm going to do the usual traditional introduction to the program. Don't worry about if you're scrambling to write down the address for Allison's book and site, which is easy. TakeBackYourWeekends.com. I will be putting that up a little bit later on. So before we dive into things, let me ask you first off, where are you dialing in from? And then secondly, when we talk about that sense that, God, I no longer have the resilience to be resilient, when we talk about that sense of what Allison calls coping fatigue, do you know anybody that is suffering from that, and what does it look like? And if you want to, you can out yourself. Give us a couple of comments into the chat, and as you know, if you've been here before, that Aoife will bring those on in a couple of minutes when we bring Aoife and Allison onto the program. Before I do so, for the handful of people who are brand new to the show, you're very, very welcome here for the first time. Genos International are an emotional intelligence organization, and our business is really about helping people to show up to one another in a way that makes them, for themselves, maximally productive, and for the enterprise, maximally productive. So we deal in a currency of emotional intelligence, psychological safety, compassion, connection, authenticity, and all of those other things that, particularly post-pandemic, are important in creating a good, functional work environment. We also certify people to do what we do. And it must be fairly good certification because the ICF have accredited for continuing education credits. We do programs also for major clients around the world. And again, we must be quite good at what we do because trainingindustry.com has cited us over the last 5 years as one of their top 20 assessment companies worldwide. One final thing about what we do, and that is in September, we will run the last running of our program, Leading with Emotional Intelligence, where we're going to talk over 6 really interactive and practical sessions about how leaders can show up in a much more authentic, connected, compassionate and empathetic way to get better results from themselves and from the people that work for them. We are doing that with a good friend of this show in collaboration with a good friend from Pinpointing Potential. Many of you will know her, and that's Kira Aspinall. As ever, for anybody who is signing up, who's a Genos Live viewer, there is a discount code there that gets you a discount on that fee. Now, with that said, before I bring Allison in, let me just tell you about next week's guest. Sean Fargo was for 2 years a Buddhist monk. And since then, he's become an entrepreneur, running one of the biggest mindfulness businesses in the United States, doing mindfulness teacher education and online courses and so on and so forth. And he's going to be here next week talking about practical ways that you can create a more mindful post-pandemic workplace. I have to tell you, this is the most grounded man you'll ever meet. 5 or 6 years ago, he coached me through a very, very difficult period. And I have to say, what he has to say next week is really powerful stuff. Sean will be the second last person in this season of Genos Live. And those of you who have been with us since the beginning at the top of the year will know that we've had a real who's who of guests over the period. And we're just about finished getting lined up the guests who will run from September through to December. So we'll publish that over the next couple of weeks. If you haven't yet signed up, Aoife's going to pop a link for the sign up in there so that we give you reminders when it comes to September about the restart of the season and the next episodes and so on and so forth. I know with LinkedIn that you can't click on those links, which is a pain in the behind, but so you'll need to either remember it or cut and paste it out to be able to sign up to that. So, before we bring Alison in, let me bring Aoife in and ask her, who have we got online today? Where are they coming in from? And have we got any comments about people's experience of coping fatigue?
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, we have lots of familiar faces back again this week and some new ones. Some folks joining from England, from and the United Kingdom, from Ireland, from Nairobi, Kenya, from Arenzano, I don't know, Anna Karen, if I'm saying that correctly, Arenzano in Italy, in Bulgaria, in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, and also in South Africa. And yeah, we do have a few people put their hand up and said, yeah, I'm fighting daily fatigue. So I think there'll be a lot of great meat in Alison's session today to help folks deal with that. So thanks for being with us again.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, continue to pop your thoughts and your experiences and your questions into the chat, because as we bring Alison in and we start that conversation, we really want to get you feeling like you got a seat at the table. So keep firing things. Alison, you're very, very welcome. It's great to have you on the show.
I'm so excited to be with you. The work you do and bringing this show out into the world is really awesome and exciting to be a part of it.
And I need to tell you folks that Alison also does a live show, and Alison is also, I'm going to tell you a secret. Alison's like me. She's a little bit of a geek. So we were really geeking out on some of the tech that's required to do some of this streaming. So so make sure that you check Alison out, check her out on LinkedIn, and check out our show as it comes up. I know there's an episode coming up shortly, and I dare say that she'll be announcing details of her new book, which will come out towards the end of the year. But before we get into the conversation, Alison, I'm going to turn over to Aoife to do the formal introduction and tell folks who you are in the background and all that sort of stuff. So over to you, Aoife.
Sure thing, Derek. Before I introduce Alison, we did have a few people comment in that how they deal with this daily fatigue is exercising, monitoring their food intake, and booking more deliberate downtime. So please do post your comments in there, folks. We'd love to share those with Alison today. We did have a lot of people share. They were really excited to hear that Alison was joining us. So I know we have some fans already on the call. But for those of you that haven't yet had the pleasure of hearing Alison speak, she is a recognized thought leader on resilience and problem solving for the human experience at work. She consults and speaks professionally and has been doing so since 2006. And Alison has served on many of North America's most influential brands as a trusted resource on what it takes to stop the destructive stress cycle in the workplace, which is a topic I think everyone will get a lot out of today. Her latest of 4 books is called Take Back Your Weekends, Stress Less, Do More, and Be Happier. It was released in 2021 and is intended to serve busy professionals who want to be successful, just without the typical risk of burnout and to-do list anxiety. This description is just me getting even more excited about what's to come today, because I feel like we're describing myself as well. Alison has been featured in the media in a variety of excellent sources such as BNN Bloomberg, Global News, The Financial Post, and USA Today, and was most recently featured in Canada's CTV's Your Morning, talking about her concept of coping fatigue, the exhaustion from having to continually be resilient, which is what we're here to talk about today. And it's also kind of perfect timing on a Friday, given the topic of your book, Alison. So how can we get better at dealing with coping fatigue and take back our weekends? I'm going to be here behind the scenes and monitoring the chat, and I'm so excited, and thank you for being with us today and sharing your message.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for that. I hear all that and I think, all right, who's talking? That's great.
So you know what, Aoife?
Thank you, Aoife.
Okay, so Alison, I mean, the first time I heard the expression coping fatigue, I just intuitively knew what it was, and I realized, oh, this is something that hadn't had a label before, and if it doesn't have a label, it's very hard to deal with it. Can you just define it for us and tell us how did you come up with it, or why did it pop into your life so fully formed as an idea?
Well, it actually came to me long before the pandemic, when I went through a really tough time in my life, as so many of us do. And I was just like, I'm done. Like, I can't take one more thing. And I think, especially with the pandemic and world events and the constant changing in our workplace and our priorities, a lot of people can relate. And it's just like, I don't want to have to be resilient anymore. Like, just give me a day off. I don't want to use this tool. And I felt like that piece, we tend to talk about resilience of the issues, whereas we rarely are talking about the collective issue and the exhaustion from having to deal with that collective piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And I would say everybody on the call here feels like yourself and myself, that we feel that we did a bloody great job remaining resilient for the real fillet of the pandemic period, and probably surprised ourselves. But I suspect that some folks are starting, like most of us, to a greater or lesser extent, to experience coping fatigue. How do you know when you've gone from being resilient enough to deal with challenging circumstances into what we define as coping fatigue?
I think the language starts to shift. I'm done. I can't take one more thing on my plate. A sense of hopelessness can come into your daily lexicon, and a feeling of things are never going to get better. I also notice that people will tend to really get triggered by things that are not necessarily what would typically trigger them in another situation, right? When they weren't feeling a sense of collective exhaustion for all the issues they're facing. And I think every person's experience is a little different. Derek, you brought up something that I think is so important to recognize. When we all, went through this pandemic, and we all had it. Remember hashtag in this together, right? Like, we're going to do this. And it was such a sense of, it was a trauma. And as humans, we are resilient, and we stepped up, and a lot of people really, it was more shock and okay. And then we hit the fall and sort of that next phase where I think people were like, okay, it's going to go away soon. Right? So we're past the shock, then we're into this, it's going to go away soon, and there's a bit of hope. And it's like, I can do this for a little bit longer. And then as it dragged, I'm actually seeing now, as we're coming into the post-pandemic world, there's a lot of uncertainty, that people are feeling worse now than they were then. Because the longevity of the situation has actually fundamentally shifted how we show up. And I think this is where people are like, oh, wait a second. We're just trying to recognize we're never going back. When people say the phrase bounce back, it just makes my skin crawl, because it sets us up for something that's not possible. We can't go back. The very notion of change and challenge is that what was is no longer. And so every time we're trying to bounce back, and we're trying to feel okay because we want things to be the way they used to be, and the sense of one day they're going to go back and then I'm going to be okay, it's just setting ourselves up for failure. It's chasing a carrot that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and the irony of it, and I've heard you speak on this a couple of times in some of the interviews you've done and in some of your blog posts, and I think people will recognize this, but the irony is that the more empty you feel, the more of yourself you start to pour into things, and it starts to gobble up your weekends and basically gobble up every resource that you have. Can you talk to us a little bit about that cycle when the sort of coping fatigue starts to kick in, and what it looks like in that way? And then we'll talk in a few moments. Don't worry, folks, I'm not going to take you down a rabbit hole and depress the hell out of you, because we're going to talk about, first off, how do you recognize, and then how do you start to unpack it a little bit? But can you talk about how this can actually lead to gobbling up your weekends?
Well, I think if we're working remotely still, right? Some people are, some people aren't. Then there's this sense of never disconnecting from the workload. And when I I do training sessions with, groups, and in the early stage before we start, I'll do a survey.
Sure.
And generally about 70% of respondents are, and this is arbitrary numbers, not in official research, right? But about 70% of the people who enter my program generally offer a sense of guilt. Right. Is a big theme. And so when we're feeling guilty because we're not able to do our work as well when we're burning out. Yeah. And so therefore we're not getting the priorities done. And then when we are trying to shut off, it's like this nagging, emotional attachment to our to-do list and the things that aren't happening. And then we can't fully relax and embrace that time off. And so I hear a lot of that. And the second piece that I hear, the other strongest theme, is this if X, then Y thinking.
Yeah.
When we hire another person on our team, then I'll be happier. Yeah. When my colleagues finally get it together and know what they're doing, right? Sometimes that happens. Then I won't be so stressed. When this project is done, then I can take time for myself. Yeah. And my work is all about, no, that's not, that if then thinking is never going to get you to the then. We need to figure out, how do you be happier? How do you take guilt-free time off to fully recharge, and so that you can be in your absolute essence and brilliance when you get back to work on Monday, and do that within today's reality, not waiting for some magic fairy dust to, sprinkle on us and make all our problems go away.
Yeah, and I want to say to you folks as well that this is something that Alison explores in quite some depth in a very practical way in the book, Take Back Your Weekends. And we won't get to dive into it in the depth that I know you guys are getting an appetite for now. But I'm just wondering, and pop it into the chat there, I'm just wondering, any of this sounding familiar to the folks out there? Something you said there, Alison, got me thinking of somebody I haven't thought about for 20 years. And I'm not sure how many people on this call will be old enough to remember a motivational speaker called Zig Ziglar?
Oh, sure.
Oh, what yeah. Well, it'd be interesting. Yeah, he was the big daddy that started, but I remember one of his talks, and he spoke about exactly what you're saying. He said, that you're under that sort of pressure when you find yourself at home feeling guilty that you really should be back in the office working. And then when you're back in the office working, you're feeling guilty that you should be at home. And there's this cycle where you just cannot break away from it. You mentioned as well a good sign of when you're starting to tip over the edge is when your weekends become more of and tell me if I've got the language wrong, but more of a collapse than a recharge.
Yes. Well, and by the way, when we say take back your weekends, to me, I don't care if you work on a Saturday or Sunday, as long as you're doing it because you're inspired and you want to, not because your work week is so off the rails that you're not getting deep work time in, you're not actually getting to your priorities, and you need that time interruption free in order to get the work done. Yeah. And so a lot of times, and I love the fact that in society, a lot of the companies, especially the big companies, are trying to set the example of, I'm going to extend your time off. I'm going to give you an extra day off. And a day off will not solve the burnout crisis, right? Because it becomes a collapse, not a recharge. Right. And so if we don't fundamentally shift how we're perceiving our daily workload, and if all of the challenges and obstacles that we face, then a day off isn't going to do anything except potentially make us feel more guiltier, or just get us in front of that Netflix and completely disconnect from the world, which is a great strategy in a little bit, but it doesn't fix what happens when you go back on Monday.
Yeah. Before we go into the how, because I think we've whetted people's appetite enough, before we go into the how, there was a comment you made in the book, and you said that the way we use the word stress can be really unhelpful in dealing with what we call stress. Can you just expand that out a little bit? Because I think it's a really interesting mindset shift that we all have to make.
Very much so, because as society, we have been trained to call everything stress. Oh, that's stressful. Oh, that's stressful. Well, maybe there's another word. And actually, this became clear to me the night before I gave my very first keynote on resilience. It was several years ago, probably about 7 now. And the night before, I went online and I did what they call a stress test.
Right.
And a stress test is essentially, here are all the things that could be going wrong in your life, and here's a numeric value on how stressful they are. And I looked at that list. Now, when I added up, thinking back to my worst time when my doctor told me to reevaluate my expectations for life and that I needed to go on disability, and there was a whole story about that after a surgery that caused, sort of was the original domino for all of this. And I thought back to that time in my life, and my score was 734. And the lesson said, if you have a score over 330, seek professional help immediately.
Wow.
And I don't tell that story to be dramatic. I mean, I think we've all gone through really difficult times. But when I look at that, like, one of the issues was I lost a lot of people who died in a very short period of time. And if I look at that, society would say, oh, that's really stressful. And I'm like, well, no, there's got to be a better word. Those were devastating. They were heart-wrenching, right? And instead of just saying stress, right, which makes it very ambiguous, and I think disempowers us to actually deal with it. And so there's good stress and there's destructive stress. And it's important to define this in your life, because good stress, we want to learn how to harness it.
Yeah.
It will inspire you, it will focus you, and it will ultimately keep you alive and out of danger. Now, destructive stress is anything that is often self-manufactured by how we're thinking or what we're believing and how we're reacting to the situations around us. And it will ultimately cause anxiety, overwhelm, poor performance. It will get us out of our optimal flow. And my belief is that we can put the systems in place to actually minimize the destructive stress, harness the good stress, and spend more time in our sweet spot of performance, productivity, and profitability. And then when we're doing really well and we're in our optimal zone during the work week, the natural byproduct of that is being able to take guilt-free time off, because we can trust our system. We know what needs to get done is getting done, and we can fully recharge on our own terms.
Right. And there's an intersection. I'm having a senior moment here, even though I don't like to consider myself a senior, and I'm forgetting. But you have a fellow countrywoman who is changing the way we think about the way the brain works, and she talks about emotional granularity and having a vocabulary to be able to define what you're feeling at a point in time as being the first step in dealing with it. And that's I think that's pretty much what you're saying. You don't just put it all in one big bucket. Yes. Because that's just not helpful.
Absolutely. And I just actually finished reading Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart. Have you read that book?
Yes. Yeah.
And it lays out all of the different emotions, not even all of them, but the average person, I think she said we could really name 5 emotions, right? Like, we're not taught this.
Yeah.
And so, like, your company is all about the emotional intelligence. So who am I to be speaking about this? But I think that is so incredibly important. Now, my philosophy, though, is because let's just back up for a second. When I went out searching, and my doctor, we were sitting there, I was desperate, and he's like, you're never going to be on pain medication again. You are never going to work full time again. You are, it's time that we start talking about you going on disability. And I was desperate. Yeah. I was crying, ugly crying, screaming in this doctor's office at the hospital. But I knew that wasn't the answer.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to give up. And with him, he said, well, then, Allison, you're going to need to learn how to be resilient. And I've come to learn that he was half right. Yes, we need to be resilient. In actual fact, we need to have a better approach to problem solving for the human experience. And as I went out looking for these resilience techniques and stress management techniques, it very quickly became clear to me that one modality is not the answer.
Right.
So while emotional intelligence is critical, so is mental discipline, right? And so people would call that mental toughness. I don't believe in toughness. So is our, physical being. Right? Even some of the people in the chat box have already shared, like, they're doing all the physical stuff that, the exercise and the nutrition and all of that is critical. But that on its own is not going to solve the problem.
Yeah. Okay, let me before we go into the how and give people what they could something they can work on over the weekend. I see Aoife give me a little wave there, so let me bring Aoife in and say what are folks saying on the chat? If they questions, comments, thoughts, I'll bet you there's a good deal of conversation going on there somehow. Are you
just
muted?
a lot
Yes,
more.
you are.
A lot more folks agreeing that they find themselves every day struggling to deal with that coping fatigue. A few more people mentioned that where they're dialing in from. So I think it's the perfect time right now to get straight into the how, because I think everyone's eager to dive into that area.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, let me throw something in that from the conversation I had with Alison when we were getting ready to have this conversation, and I said to Alison that is an expression that belongs on the cover of a book. And she said, "It's funny you should say that." So keep an eye out over the next couple of months, because that is going to end up on the cover of a book. Thank you for that, Aoife. So you have a step-by-step. In general, it's a problem-solving approach. How would you apply it to this?
So first thing, traditionally when we try to solve problems, we go to solution first thinking, right? So people will say, okay, I'm burning out, I'm not taking the weekend off, I need some time off, and they'll try to figure out the solutions, but there's usually something deeper. And so the problem solving framework is situational awareness, self-awareness, and then solution activation. Okay. So the situational awareness is getting really clear, and I've got a framework I'm going to share with you on this, on exactly what's happening so that you can solve for the right issues. Yeah. Sometimes we're not solving for the right ones if we don't do this process. The second piece is the self-awareness. How am I contributing? Or first you want to ask, how am I responding to what's happening? And then be compassionately curious with yourself to ask the question, how could my patterns be contributing to the intensity of this and making it harder than it needs to be? And then we can put in the solution activation. And speaking of the self-awareness, if we focus there for a moment, sometimes when people are working on the weekends, it's because they have a pattern of unrealistic expectations of themselves. Usually not so much of others when it comes to workload. They don't want their colleagues working on the weekends necessarily, sure, but they'll do it for themselves. Or they're procrastinators, so they're not getting the work done during the week, and then it's like, oh, crunch time, I got to get to it. Or they feel like it's part of their identity. Oh, I work really long hours, and somehow that makes them feel like they're doing a better job. And perhaps it's really a misguided, a sense of identity that we need to shift. So there are 31 barriers to performance that I outline in the book, Take Back Your Weekends. But we want to get really clear if there's anything extra that is contributing to making it harder to actually take guilt-free time off.
Okay. So let's say I'm one of the folks on the call, and I'm aware that I'm suffering this, and I think it's safe to say, to a greater or lesser extent, everybody is suffering some degree of this coping fatigue. Give me an example of how I bring situational awareness to that. Imagine it yourself. What are the questions you're asking yourself? What's the process you're going through?
Okay, so the first thing, I've got to tell you about the ice cube that became the snowman, because this is foundational to everything.
Okay, yeah.
My system. Okay, so if you imagine every task and obstacle that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis is an ice cube, right? And your job is to melt that ice cube as effectively and efficiently as possible.
Okay.
The sooner you melt the ice cubes, the sooner you can get on with your day, take your time off, it's done. But as part of the human experience, we just don't melt ice cubes. No. We always have access to a mound of snow at any one time, and we can put those ice cubes in the snow. And the snow is represented by misplaced emotion, negative storyline, and barriers to performance like unrealistic expectations, frequent interruptions, guilt, worry, procrastination. As I said, there are 31 of them that I've identified, and many, many more, truthfully. And so what we do is we take this ice cube, and maybe it's a report that we need to get done. Yeah. Okay. We put it in the snow, and now we add on a little misplaced emotion, right? You're feeling resentful towards your work because your boss is giving you too much. You are feeling unheard and whatever that is happening over there, and then you're taking it out on this report. Right? There's some more snow. Then we add in a little more snow of negative storyline. Okay. Nobody needs to read this report anyway. This is a total waste of time. So-and-so is not doing this. Like, it just, add on that story. Then we add in the procrastination, perhaps, right? So I remember right before COVID, I went out for lunch with a friend of mine, and she works as an executive level at the local office. And of course, there's national office. So it's a full firm. And she sits down and I said, so how's work going? She's awful. I'm like, oh gosh, okay. She says, yeah, it's time I quit. I think it's time for me to start looking for a new job. And I'm like, wow, this must be, okay, what's going on? She goes, well, they asked me for this new report. And, they just don't get it. They don't know what's going on in the ground. They, disrespect me. Nobody's going to read it. Like, all of this stuff. And it was due 3 weeks ago. And I got to quit. I said, wow, how big is this report? How long is it going to take you? And she's like, 15 minutes. You have built a snowman around a 15-minute ice cube. And this is the messy part of our human experience. And it happens in varying degrees. And I don't think any of us are immune to it.
No.
I know, I came up with all those barriers to performance because I've had them all and had to work through them with the problem-solving framework. But if we can recognize that we're turning ice cubes into snowmen, then that's the first piece of the puzzle. And we want to look at, okay, how do I solve the actual ice cube? Each one of them, right? So that's the first piece of the problem-solving framework. There's a rapid-fire resilience rundown that helps you, apply the framework. And that is going to be what the new book is all about. I'd like to go into depth in each one of those pieces. But understanding that and seeing the ice cubes versus the snowmen, because at the end of the day, the task doesn't change.
Yeah. So cutting through, and I as you were talking there, I was thinking about a couple of things that are on my to-do list, and they may become permanently on my to-do list because, to use your terminology, I have wrapped a lot of snow around them, and I'm avoiding them, actively avoiding them. I'm finding anything I can do to not to have to engage with them for some reason, some that sound remarkably like what you're talking about. So the first thing is stripping through and recognizing here's what actually needs to be done. It's a 15-minute report, and if that's what it is, and I get it off my desk, well, then that whole snowman is gone. Is that what we're saying? Say in terms of situational awareness, what's really going on?
Well, it's one piece of it. I mean, the two other pieces with situational awareness, we got to look at what our control is. What is within our control? And I don't have people do this exercise because I believe that we shouldn't focus on what's outside of our control.
Sure.
So, because that's what we hear, right? And I used to hear it all the time. I'd be like, oh, just don't focus on the stuff that isn't out of your control. But that's not how we act as humans. We need to be able to process that. And then it's this idea, one of the second foundational piece is the difference between tasks, obstacles, and adversities. Okay. And as a society, we call them all stress. And I have people actually go, okay, what is stressing you out? And I'm going to encourage everybody who's listening to write a list. What's causing you stress right now? On a piece of paper, and then let's look at it objectively. The tasks are the things we need to do. The obstacles are the issues that we need to solve. And adversities are the catastrophic external forces that will forever change the way we know our lives to be. These are the things that we can't to-do list through.
Sure. We
can't do the whole, if you're going through hell, keep going piece on an adversity, because that's essentially denying our true human emotions of grief and all the biggest stuff in our lives. So for adversities, we need to find ways to heal and to serve our own healing and allow ourselves the space and the grace to actually be able to heal those. And so if you're sitting there and you go, okay, my weekends are out of whack, I'm working too much, I'm burning out, I'm just exhausted from dealing all with this, the first thing you want to do is stop dealing with things that you don't need to deal with, i.e. turning ice cubes into snowmen.
Yeah.
And also then giving doing this exercise of tasks, obstacles, adversities. So you start allocating the appropriate emotional response to each thing that is on your list.
Okay, so I look at my big list, my big to-do list, and there's a number of things on there that are a source of stress, and I inventory them, if you like, to see are they tasks, obstacles, or adversity. And tasks, that's probably your buddy. That report that had to be done, I just keep on through and get it done. Obstacles, what do I do about obstacles, or what's the approach to those? The task sounds easy enough.
The task is easy enough, but it's interesting you say that, because as a society, we have it reversed.
All right.
Because the tasks we glorify. How are you? Oh, I'm so busy.
Yeah, I'm so productive. Yeah.
Right? And adversities, we minimize. Like, we've seen this, right? People come back too early to work from losing a loved one, perhaps, or going through a cancer diagnosis. You ask them how they are, and their answer is, I'm fine. You're not fine. You just had an absolute shift in the foundation of how your life is.
Yeah.
And so we do this, but the tasks, we do them. And in order to do them, we need, the time in our schedule to do them without the interruptions. And so I talk a lot about the task circle in my online course and how to actually manage that to get this good, deep work. For obstacles, we want to sit. Did I just lose you?
Yep.
Did I lose you for a sec?
No, you did not.
Interesting. My whole computer just went off.
Oh, God.
I guess because I wasn't touching the screen, it just went to sleep on me. All good. So with the obstacles, we want to actually go, it's like a layer of onion. We want to put problem-solving framework on it. And we want to essentially get the obstacle. We've got to give ourselves the space and the grace to look at it objectively. Say, here's the obstacle, aka the ice cube. What am I doing to add anything to it, right? Like, so we can peel back all of the snow, so we're just dealing with the obstacle.
Right.
And one of the layers of snow may be, I'm stubborn about how I think this is supposed to be solved, right? And so we have to be aware enough to recognize that and go, oh, wait a second. Maybe I need to shift my thinking. Maybe I need to be open to getting help, or asking my colleague how they do that, or creating a network of other leaders who are facing similar problems.
Right.
And so really looking at it, and then what we want to do is lowest common denominator, highest level of control are our tasks. And so we want to boil our obstacles. Once we have the solution, how we implement the solution are tasks. And if we get super, super good at being incredibly efficient and effective at doing our tasks, then the obstacles don't end up taking as much of our bandwidth.
And it sounds to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, it sounds to me like this is I'm trying to think of the right expression, but it's if you like a mental rigor or a mindset rigor, where you have to approach all of these things that all traditionally we throw into this big bucket called stress, and if you like, discipline yourself to look at them in a new light, to look at them through the lenses of task, adversity, and obstacle, and then to decide what do I do with them. Is that, if I finish your program tomorrow, is that where I land? That I have this approach encoded into me that makes it easier for me to see what's actually going on and get a greater situational awareness?
Absolutely, because most stress management and resilience is about adding behavior.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if we're already overloaded on our to-do list, if we have to-do list anxiety, if we're feeling coping fatigue, adding a new behavior is probably going to add another layer of stress.
Right.
And so my belief, my philosophy is, if we change our approach, our reaction to everything that's happening around us, we're actually going to create less destructive stress. So then we become more efficient. We can increase our outputs per hour. And when we are in our optimal zone of sweet spot of performance, productivity, and profitability, then we can automatically take the time off. Now, it's sometimes people are like, no, I just want to know what I need to do. And, go exercise. Great. If you love to exercise. And it is really good for you. And if you love to meditate. At the end of the day, though, you cannot be in a contentious, client meeting or a meeting with your colleague that's gotten off the rails and go, excuse me, you're stressing me out. I'm going to just meditate for a minute.
Yeah.
Like, that's not how it works. Now, but if we can fundamentally shift how we're interpreting what's going on, we won't have that negative stress reaction.
Okay.
It's not to say those critical pieces of the puzzle and stress management techniques that are traditional aren't important. They absolutely are, right? We need to be mindful. We need to exercise. We need to have proper nutrition, because if that's off, everything else is going to be impacted as well. But if we don't shift the thinking and the reaction to what's happening around us, we are always going to be at risk of what's going on and being pulled in different directions.
Right. So it sounds we've more or less hit the almost completely dealt with that first part of situational awareness. So I would come to all of the things that are causing what I traditionally call stress. I hope I didn't.
Yeah.
Oh.
Did I lose you?
No, you didn't lose me, but I just swung my hand out and I hit the stream button and disconnected the stream there momentarily. Holy God. Okay, we are back online again. So it just literally, that has never happened before, and I saw it click. Okay. So we're kind of mostly through situational awareness. So if I was applying this 3-step process, I'd be coming to all of the things that are causing me what I traditionally call stress. I'd be using those filters to split them into tasks, obstacles, and adversity. And tasks are dealt with as tasks, and obstacles, when you peel away the layers, end up as, being dealt with as tasks to the extent they can be. What about adversity? Because that's one that you said, those are really things that over which you don't have too much control.
No, but the beauty of this model is that tasks feed obstacles, feed adversities, and adversities feed obstacles that feed tasks. So I'll explain. Too many tasks left undone will ultimately create an obstacle. Lost client, all-nighters, then you're exhausted, so it creates obstacles. Too many obstacles left unsolved will ultimately create an adversity. There's a lot of research around how destructive stress can ultimately cause our health issues, right? Like dis-ease, right? When we're in distress. And so I look at this, but then it works the other way. When we face an adversity, from every adversity comes new obstacles. And from every obstacle, when we find a solution, comes new tasks.
Right.
And that, using that model, when we write everything down. So I'll use the example of when I had, that time in my life when the doctor told me to go on disability, I would never work full time. And I left that hospital and I'm like, I'm going to learn how to be resilient. And I put on my business consultant hat and I said, okay, the adversity that I can't change is chronic neuropathic pain that is going to impact parts of my life that I need to heal from and I emotionally need to process. Can't change that. But what are the obstacles that come from it? And there were many. One of which was driving myself to Toronto. It was about a 2.5 hour drive. If I hit traffic, it was just detrimental because I was unsafe, right? My pain would spike and I'd be like into my pelvis and I just couldn't keep driving. So I'd pull over on the side of the road, try to get my composure. And so I knew that driving myself was an obstacle. And when I looked at that and I said, okay, what are my options to solve this? I said, okay, well, I could get myself a chauffeur, or I could get clients that are closer, which wasn't feasible because I was working with a lot of the big banks and they were in Toronto and often up at the north end of the city. I could take public transit. Again, sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. I need to hire a chauffeur. Well, I didn't have the money to hire a chauffeur. And so I did what potentially any independent, strong business owner, female in her 30s at the time, might do. I called my mom. And I said, hey, I know you're adjusting to retired life and life after, dad died, but what if you moved to the city and you hung out with me and we'd have so much fun. And by the way, you could drive me to every one of my gigs and you could turn off my lights at night when my body collapses and I don't have even the functionality to get up and turn off the light. And, God bless her, she's a saint. She said yes. And so she gave up her life and she came, her life back home, right? And came and lived with me. And I got her a condo above me. and she would drive me to every one of my gigs.
Wow.
And I would smile and pull up to the front, door. And as soon as I came out, right, I'd text her and be like, okay, pick me up. And I'd get in the car and I would just collapse. And so there's an example of adversity was the pain.
Right.
From it came an obstacle, driving. From the obstacle came a task. In this case was to call my mom and then to have her drive me. So that was the task.
Okay.
So that's how we can feel more empowered. But then when we start thinking coping fatigue, okay, that could be, it's not really an adversity, but it definitely could be getting close because you're on that burnout and there are ramifications from that from a health perspective. But let's look at this and let's say, okay, what are the obstacles that I'm facing? Well, my workload is too much and I'm not able to get it all done during the week. Okay, so then we apply the problem solving framework, we look for the snow, and we go, how can I get it done? And then that, maybe the task becomes communicating boundaries, working with my leadership team and my colleagues to figure out a new strategy for our workflow so everybody gets deep work time in, right? Like it's just an onion. And so we pull this down, and sometimes the task that needs to come is I need to take a nap every day, right? From the afternoon, or I need to start exercising, or I need to go and check out without my kids around me and without any responsibility and go dancing with my friends, whatever that task is for you. But we bring strategy, we give ourselves some compassionate curiosity instead of self-judgment and criticism, and we explore this and get down to paper and we solve it. This system, Derek, is not going to solve this weekend, although it could. It's about your longevity. Yeah. It's about how am I going to show up and enjoy my life for the next 6 months? Because what I know to be true is if you do not fundamentally shift how you're showing up for your life, how we have responded to outside circumstances for the last 6 months will continue and will replicate as a pattern in the next 6 months.
Right. Okay, now I think we've done a reasonable job given the road that we have on the situational awareness, and I'm just conscious of time, and I also want to get an opportunity to talk to you at the end about what you do. By the way, folks, this is something, and correct me if I'm wrong here. No, I'm not wrong because I've seen it. In the book, folks, Alison dives into this in much more detail, so you can scan that little QR code and grab it, and you'll get more of a step-by-step approach to this. But let's say you've unpacked, with that situational awareness, you've unpacked all of the things that are causing, to some extent, that coping effect, fatigue, that are burning up or making you feel this inclination to burn up your weekends. Talk to me a little bit about the self-awareness part of it, which is the next part.
Yes, and that was integrated into what I was just saying. So getting compassionate and curious, recognizing what the snow is, what your patterns are that might be causing or intensifying what you're dealing with. That piece is pivotal because we need to understand that so that you're showing up and creating a solution that's going to work for you.
Okay. So let's say there's a load of folks listening to the session here right now, and I'm just wondering, as they move into the weekend, what could they do to get this process started? What would you suggest to somebody besides buying a book? And I would strongly encourage people to do so. But what could they actually do if they took an hour or two out to get this process started over the weekend? What would you recommend as first 1 or 2 steps?
Number one, get out a piece of paper, write down everything that is causing you stress, and go through what I just said. Is it a task? Is it an obstacle? Or is it an adversity? Because that perspective is going to give you a little bit of insight for your brain to release. Okay?
Right.
The next thing I'm going to ask you to do is at the very end of the day, and you can create a routine like this. Many people already have one, is to put a little bow on your work week. Okay. What did I get done? What are the priorities that are moving forward for next week? And then go a step further and schedule the deep work time in that you need to get those priorities done for next week. So like Tuesday morning, I'm going to get this project done. I'm going to put it in my calendar, and nothing is going to interrupt me and stop me from doing that. I'm going to treat it like a meeting. Because what I have found to be true is that when somebody has a really productive work week, And when they have a system that they can trust, that they know and they can trust themselves and the system, that everything is captured. All the projects are allotted for, you know when that work is going to get done. When we achieve that, then our brains can actually relax.
Right.
So that is a critical piece of the puzzle. And what I teach, because I was always looking at how do I get more done in less time, right? Like in that time, I had 2 to 5 hours of functionality physically a day. And I had to keep my business going, and I was working in the media at the time as well. And so like I had to get so good at compressing the activities and the tasks. And now that I'm able-bodied in the sense that I still have the pain, but I know exactly how to deal with it, and it doesn't dictate my life like it used to, I can have a whole 8-hour day that used to take me an hour to do the work, right? When it was like, have no deadline. So this I know is just like about our habits and our process, but that's why I don't believe in a traditional to-do list. I think they're completely ineffective. And so I teach a system called the task circle, which is in my online course. And it just is so freeing. And it's like you can trust it. And when we can trust the work is going to get done and we know how we're going to make it happen, then our brain can release and take that time off that we really need.
Okay. On that note, let me just see, because we're marching towards our time. I'm just wondering, Ava, thank you. Ava, comments, questions, anything coming in from folks? And did I screw everybody up by hitting that button?
I think there might have been a disconnect with the LinkedIn stream, but we're still streaming over directly to YouTube. So I've shared that link in there. So these things happen.
Absolutely.
It's not definitely not to cause any more stress.
Adversity.
Everyone will be able to get the full episode. We did have a question that it was starting to come to my mind as well. So someone asked Alison first, do you have other words you use for stress? And I know we talked about breaking them into different categories, but this brought to mind something for me from when Derek and I would do emotional intelligence trainings. So sometimes the attendees will share that they go back and sit down with their kids at the dinner table and they explain what they've learned about what self-awareness is and all these different terms. And they have special words they use in their family. Instead of saying that's stupid or I'm angry, they use other words to combine and explain their emotions. I think, Derek, what was it? Crangry was cranky and angry instead of using those terms, or schmappy. And, so in your programs and in your work, do you still encourage people to label these things as stress, or do you have other words that you like to use?
Yeah. So whenever the word stress comes up, I will, and even with my friends or my coaching clients, I will interrupt and go, give me another word.
Okay.
And because generally the other word is going to be overwhelmed, which we can totally deal with because we're just going to go through the problem solving framework and go to your task circle and we're going to pull it out, right? It could be often fearful. I'm not going to be able to get it done. It could be like the only word that I've ever created that I think is like a different kind of word is pangry, which is pain-induced anger and irritability, much like hangry, which is hunger-induced, which a lot of people use. But that pangry, we need to bring the awareness to it. So yes, there are 2 words that I don't allow in my lexicon. One is stress, as it relates to, like if I'm saying, oh my God, I'm stressed, I would never actually utter those words. I might say, I'm overwhelmed. I'm feeling uncertain about what my next step is. I would just describe it more clearly. And the other word that I will not allow in my lexicon is busy. Yeah, nobody's impressed that you're busy because nobody thinks you're not busy. Right? Yeah. Like we just don't. So because that just feeds the negative storyline, aka another layer of snow. Oh my God, I'm so busy, I'm so busy, I'm so busy, which is basically telling your brain that you don't have time to do the things you want to do. But here's something else is I think it's so critical that we watch the extreme words. I was doing a workshop, leadership team, and one of the people said, every day my kids, one of them is home from work or from school because everybody's getting the sniffles, and then I have to cancel my meetings. And, I'm never getting my work days in. And I'm like, oh, okay, let's adjust this. What's the real issue, AKA the ice cube? And as we went through it, it's like, okay, 4 days of the month, you've got a problem,
right,
that your kids are sick, not 30 days of the month. And so those extreme storylines will actually end up feeding the stress. And so that's where I really, try to push on the language to find what we're using. And I know we're close on time, but one other strategy that is really helpful. I remember I was coaching with a client, and we did our onboarding, and she was telling me what's going on. And towards the end, I said, "Hey, listen, would you mind just creating a cheat sheet for me?" And she's like, "Sure, on what?" I said, "Can you make a list of all the things you're awful at?" And she goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, so far in this meeting, you've told me that you're awful at sales, awful at HR, awful at getting your things done, awful at your mumming, right? You're awful contributor to the PTA, all of the, and by the way, not to mention awful at cash flow, etc." And I'm like, "You have told me you're awful at pretty much everything." She goes, "No, I haven't." And I'm like, "I want you to write the word awful, because we all have an awful, right, on the top of your day planner. And every time you utter that word, I want you to write a little tick note." And she was like 48 hours later, she called me. She's like, "Oh my God, I say it all the time." I'm like, "I know." So your brain is going to think you're awful at it. And so finding those words that you use. I mean, I'll admit my word was idiot. I was an idiot for everything. Yeah. That's what I called myself. And it was like, "You're such a lazy idiot." Like when I would collapse with the pain, I'd be like, "You're so lazy. You're such an idiot. Why are you doing that? Why did you say that? How bad a speech was that?" Like, I mean, I just would ram on myself. And so the only way I found to stop that negative inner critic is to give the internal voice an external presence.
Yeah.
So take that word, write it down on a piece of paper. What's the storyline you're telling about the situation? And it could be anything that we've talked about or any challenge that you're going through. And write it out. And look, and then you can objectively adjust and go, "Do I believe that to be true?" And then we find new words. So then the next piece is like, when you say that idiot or awful, you have to stop. This is a self-awareness, and replace the word.
Okay.
So there's a little.
No, that's really useful. Thank you. I'm really conscious of time, and we always promise people we get them out on time. But I do not want to leave before saying, folks, you couldn't be easier to remember where to find Allison. It's takebackyourweekends.com. But tell me in a minute, Allison, you do keynotes, you have an online course, you do live courses, tell us what people should contact you for.
If you're running a conference or a professional development day keynote, I also have a flagship training program that will embed this philosophy into your culture if you're a leader who wants to stop the destructive stress cycle. I do work with executives one-on-one for their own overwhelm and for strategizing how we're going to deal with the team. But the thing that's most available to the individual across the world is my course on the task circle and this philosophy, and really applying it to your workflow so you get the absolute maximum productivity in your workday week so that you can take your weekends off.
Thank you. Very succinct. Thank you very much indeed.
I'm sold. I can't wait to. I said I'm sold. I can't wait to learn more about the task circle. It just sounds like something that's right up my alley.
One sale at least.
We will be sending you all the links to Allison's website, her book, all of the different resources we mentioned today, and a comprehensive 1 hour recording of the session because of that little blip in the middle. Allison, from me, thank you so much for being with us today. That was so helpful. Really, really grateful for you.
Yeah, really grateful. And I hope you can hang around just for 1 minute after, so when we go off air, we can thank you properly. So thank you very much for that. Folks, let me finish it off and I'll get you out absolutely on time. Let me see. Yeah, there we go. So, oh look, I'm gone all ghostly. There I am. So as I say, takebackyourweekends.com, very easy to remember, and you can download the book from that right away. Next week we have Sean talking about how to create a more mindful post-pandemic workplace. So until then, I wish you all the very, very best for a great weekend and a great week ahead. And we will see you next week for the second last in our series. Richard Boyatzis will be finishing us off on the 23rd of the month. Until we see you again, all the very best. Take care.